I stole my sister's husband, and I have no regrets. Shocking, isn't it? But if you think this is just another cliché about cheating and betrayal, you're mistaken. This isn't just about an affair. This is about power, about taking what I deserve, about a woman who refused to remain in the shadows. My name is Taylor. Don't picture some innocent, naive girl. I know I'm beautiful, platinum blonde hair that catches the light just right, deep red lips that always seem to whisper secrets. I know how to make men crave me. I know how to walk into a room and make everyone notice. And most importantly, I know how to get what I want. April, my sister, is the kind of woman people admire. Soft brown hair, a gentle smile, a stable job, a perfect husband, a dream house. She's the woman mothers praise, the golden child who always did everything right. And me? I was the opposite. The rebellious one, the wild one. The girl who never played by the rules. For years, I thought she had everything. A loving marriage, a life anyone would envy. But then I saw the cracks. The way Michael, her husband, looked at her with quiet indifference. The way they barely touched. The way their home felt more like a well-decorated museum than a place filled with passion. A beautiful house doesn't mean a beautiful marriage. Then I entered Michael's world like a storm, unpredictable, exhilarating, untamed. I wasn't April. I didn't hold back, didn't shrink myself to fit into a neat little mold of the perfect wife. I laughed louder, touched without hesitation, spoke without fear. And Michael? He noticed. He looked at me in a way he hadn't looked at her in years. I reminded him of something he had forgotten: desire, adventure, life. I didn't seduce him outright. No, I was patient. I let him drown in the contrast between me and April. I saw the way his eyes lingered when I walked past, the way his breath hitched when my fingers barely brushed against his. It was a game, and I was winning. I don't believe in fate. I believe in control. And Michael, April's husband, was about to become mine. Do you think I'm a terrible person? I don't. And if you have doubts, let me tell you everything. Michael was never meant to be April's. Not truly. He was a man trapped in a routine, a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted. He had built a life of stability with her, a picture-perfect marriage, a home straight out of a catalog, polite smiles at dinner parties. But beneath it all, there was emptiness. And I could see it. I started small, subtle, the way every good game of seduction begins. At family gatherings, I let my fingertips brush against his arm just a second longer than necessary. I locked eyes with him across the dinner table, holding his gaze until he looked away first. I laughed a little too hard at his jokes, even the bad ones, making him feel clever, interesting, like a man April had long stopped paying attention to. I dressed just right, never overtly provocative, but always alluring. A silk blouse that draped over my skin, a dress that hinted at curves without screaming for attention. And Michael noticed. At first, it was just a flicker, curiosity, perhaps. The way his eyes would find me in a crowded room, the slight shift in his demeanor when I was near. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. It only grows stronger when fed. I waited. I let him feel the weight of that curiosity, let it build inside him until he started looking for me even when he didn't mean to. And then, I gave him just enough. A stolen glance, a knowing smirk, a whisper too quiet for anyone but him to hear. Then came the first real test. A charity gala, an event April had planned meticulously. She was the perfect hostess, floating through the room in an elegant gown, smiling at all the right people, saying all the right things. Meanwhile, I played the opposite. I was effortless, intoxicating. While April talked about mortgage rates and dinner reservations, I leaned in close to Michael, my voice low, teasing. "Do you ever get tired of all this?" I asked, twirling my wine glass between my fingers. He blinked, caught off guard. All what? The perfect life. The expectations. The rules. I tilted my head, watching his reaction. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, almost too quiet to hear, he said, "Sometimes." That was all I needed. Over the following weeks, I became the escape he didn't know he needed. I showed up when April wasn't home, claiming I was just passing by. I left behind small reminders, my perfume lingering on his couch, a lipstick-stained coffee cup, accidentally forgotten in his kitchen. I laughed with him, teased him, made him feel like a man April had stopped seeing. And Michael? He started changing. He checked his phone more often when I wasn't around. His texts became longer, his responses quicker. He started making excuses to be alone, to find moments where it could be just the two of us. He was falling. Slowly, but undeniably. The first rail slip happened on a rainy Thursday evening. April was out of town for work, and I knew exactly where Michael would be at home, pretending to work, sipping a drink in front of the fireplace like he always did when she was away. I knocked on his door, drenched from the rain, my coat clinging to me. "Taylor?" His surprise was genuine. I was in the neighborhood. I gave him a small, sheepish smile. "Got caught in the storm. Hope you don't mind." He hesitated, just for a second, but then he stepped aside. "Come in." I let him watch as I peeled off my wet coat, revealing the dress underneath, soft, delicate, slightly damp. I shivered, just enough for him to notice. "You're freezing," he said, already reaching for a blanket. "Maybe a drink would help." I tilted my head, giving him that look, the one that had always made him pause. He poured the whiskey, his fingers lingering on the glass as he handed it to me. The air between us thickened. He knew it, I knew it. This was the moment. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then tell me to leave." I took a slow sip, holding his gaze over the rim of my glass. He didn't. Instead, he stepped closer, the heat between us growing unbearable. And then, finally, he gave in. The kiss was hesitant at first, almost cautious. But when my fingers tangled into his hair, when his hands gripped my waist, restraint shattered. I felt him surrender, felt the weight of all his years of longing crash down at once. That night, he wasn't April's husband. He was mine. But seduction is only the first battle. And I didn't just want Michael in secret, I wanted to win. So I played my next move carefully. I never pushed too hard, never rushed. I let him think he was making the choices. I let him feel guilty, let him wrestle with his conscience just enough to make the final decision feel like his own. I dropped hints, little seeds of doubt. "April takes you for granted. Does she even notice when you're gone? You deserve to be with someone who sees you." Each word chipped away at the life he thought he had. And soon, he wasn't just sneaking around with me. He was questioning everything. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. One evening, as we lay tangled in sheets, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my skin, he whispered it. "I think I love you." I smiled, running my fingers through his hair, my lips brushing against his ear. "Then prove it." It was the final push. And Michael, per Michael, was already too far gone to stop. April always prided herself on her intuition. She believed she knew Michael better than anyone, that she could sense when something was off. But that was the problem with people like her. They assumed love meant security. They assumed devotion meant blind trust. She didn't notice the signs at first. The late nights. The sudden, unexplained distance. The way Michael's touch felt different, not absent, but forced, as if he was trying too hard to convince himself that nothing had changed. But doubt has a way of creeping in, no matter how much you try to ignore it. One night, April was folding laundry when she found it. A single strand of blonde hair on Michael's shirt. Not brown. Not hers. Her stomach tightened, but she forced herself to dismiss it. Hair gets everywhere. It could have been from a coworker, from a stranger on the subway. She wouldn't let paranoia ruin her marriage. But then came the perfume. My perfume. The scent clung to Michael's jacket, familiar yet foreign in her home. April had never worn anything so bold, so intoxicating. And suddenly, the excuses he'd been feeding her, late meeting at work, I lost track of time, you're overthinking things, felt heavier. A seed of doubt had been planted. And April, as perfect as she was, couldn't ignore it any longer. It wasn't until she saw the text message that she finally broke. It was late. Michael was in the shower. His phone sat on the nightstand, screen glowing in the dim light. April wasn't the type to snoop, but something pulled her toward it. And then, there it was. My name. A message that wasn't even particularly incriminating, but damning all the same. I miss you already. April's hands shook as she read it, her breath shallow. It wasn't just the message. It was the intimacy of it. The casual confidence, the way it carried no fear, no hesitation. As if this wasn't new. As if this had been going on long enough for me to know I had nothing to fear. When Michael stepped out of the bathroom, she was waiting. Who is she? Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned. Michael froze, towel draped over his shoulders, water still dripping from his hair. What? Don't lie to me, Michael. She held up his phone, the message glaring like an open wound. Who is Taylor? His expression flickered, guilt, panic, calculation. But he didn't answer fast enough. That was enough of an answer. April wasn't a woman who screamed. She didn't throw things or cause a scene. But the silence in that moment was louder than any outburst could have been. How long? She finally asked. Michael exhaled, rubbing his face, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his own betrayal. It's not what you think. She laughed, sharp, humorless. It never is it? But she already knew. The perfume, the hair, the distance, the whispers of doubt that she had shoved down for weeks. The truth was undeniable now, sitting between them like an uninvited guest. And then, just when she thought it couldn't get worse, he said the words that shattered everything. I love her. April didn't come to me right away. No, she sat with it, let it fester, let it burn. She wasn't a woman who acted on impulse. She was strategic, careful. But anger, when contained for too long, doesn't dissolve. It erupts. I was expecting her when she finally came. The knock on my apartment door was sharp, precise. No hesitation. When I opened it, she was standing there, eyes cold, jaw clenched. You're not even going to pretend to be ashamed, she asked, stepping inside without an invitation. I smiled. Why should I be? Her hand curled into a fist at her side. He's my husband. Not anymore. I tilted my head, watching the way her breathing hitched. Michael made his choice. You think this is love? She let out a bitter laugh. You think he won't do the same to you? I shrugged. Maybe. But right now, he's mine. That was what broke her. Her hand lashed out before she could stop herself, striking my cheek with a force I hadn't expected. The sting bloomed instantly, but I didn't flinch. I just smiled, touching the place where her palm had left its mark. Feel better? I asked. April's breath was ragged, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But she didn't answer. She just turned, walking toward the door. Before she left, she looked at me over her shoulder. You think you've won. But trust me, Taylor, you haven't seen what I'm capable of yet. And with that, she was gone. Michael didn't go home that night. I found him on my couch, staring blankly at a glass of whiskey. She knows, he muttered. Of course, she does, I replied, pouring myself a drink. He exhaled, rubbing his face. I thought, he stopped, shaking his head. It doesn't matter. I sat beside him, fingers tracing the rim of my glass. She'll fight for you, you know. I don't want her to. Then prove it. Michael looked at me then, and I knew he was already too far gone to turn back. He had crossed the line, and there was no returning to the life he once had. But April? She wasn't done. And something told me this war was just beginning. Michael and I had won. At least, that's what I thought. April was gone, her perfect life shattered, her husband now mine. The victory should have felt sweet, intoxicating. But reality has a cruel way of unraveling fantasies. The honeymoon phase was short-lived. At first, Michael and I were electric, our passion fueled by the thrill of secrecy now exposed under the open sky. We moved into a sleek downtown apartment, far removed from the suburban life he had built with April. It was exciting, waking up in silk sheets, wrapped in his warmth, believing that I had finally gotten everything I wanted. But love built on destruction rarely stands strong. It started with small things. The way Michael would go quiet whenever April's name came up in the news. The way he hesitated before introducing me to people, not as his girlfriend, but as someone undefined. Do you regret it? I asked one night, my voice sharper than I intended. Michael looked up from his drink, sighing. Regret what? Leaving her. Choosing me. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I had once found endearing. It's not that simple, Taylor. I hated that answer. I hated that even now, with me in his bed and April nowhere in sight, she still had space in his mind. But I said nothing. I swallowed tea. Time did nothing. The fire that once burned between us started to flicker. Michael became distant, his affection turning into obligation. He worked later, answered my texts slower, and when he was home, his mind was somewhere else. One night, I caught him staring at old photos, April, smiling at him in a way I never had. What are you doing? I asked, standing in the doorway. Michael shut his laptop too fast, guilt flashing across his face. Nothing. Just deleting some old files. Liar. I didn't say anything, but my stomach twisted. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had stolen him from April, and now I was terrified of losing him in the same way. The real breaking point came during a dinner with his colleagues. It was a high-end restaurant, the kind of place where the wine list was longer than the menu. I had dressed perfectly, an elegant black dress, subtle but seductive. I knew how to play this role. And then someone mentioned April. I saw April last week, one of Michael's coworkers said. She looks different, stronger. The table buzzed with quiet murmurs. Someone else chimed in. She's been doing charity work, right? Really putting herself out there. Michael stiffened beside me. I watched his grip tighten around his glass, his jaw clench ever so slightly. And that's when I knew. She wasn't a ghost in his past. She was still in his head, in his heart. I placed my hand on his thigh, a silent reminder that I was here. That she was supposed to be the one left behind. But he didn't relax. If anything, he seemed more tense. That night, he barely touched me. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that he was just adjusting, that things would settle. But Michael had changed. The man who once chased after me, who whispered reckless promises in my ear, was gone. He had traded one prison for another. One night, as we lay in bed, I turned to him. Do you love me? He didn't answer right away. That was enough of an answer. Michael. My voice was softer now. Tell me you love me. He exhaled. Taylor, I sat up, my chest tightening. You what? He ran a hand down his face, his exhaustion palpable. I don't know anymore. The words hit harder than I expected. You left her for me, I whispered, more to myself than to him. You told me I was what you wanted. Michael looked at me then, and I saw it in his eyes, regret. Not for the affair. For choosing me. I should have left first. I should have walked away with my pride intact. But instead, I clung to the illusion, desperate to hold on to what was slipping through my fingers. I started checking his phone, reading his emails, looking for signs. And then I found it. An unsent message. April, just that. Nothing more. But I knew what it meant. He still loved her. That night, I confronted him. You never let her go, I accused, my voice shaking. Michael ran a hand through his hair, the same nervous habit, the same guilt. Taylor, you don't love me. He didn't argue. The silence was suffocating. Are you going back to her? My voice was barely a whisper. Michael looked away. And that was my answer. In the end, I lost everything. Michael left, not for April, not for me, but for himself. He had burned down his marriage for something that didn't last. And I was left with nothing but the wreckage. For the first time, I wondered if April had truly lost, or if she had won in a way I never saw coming. She had been broken, humiliated, betrayed. But she had risen. She had moved forward. And me? I had spent so much time stealing what wasn't mine that I never stopped to ask if it was worth keeping. I lost. Not in the dramatic, fiery way people expect villains to fall. No grand betrayal. No public humiliation. Just an empty apartment, silence where Michael's voice used to be, and a realization that burned more than any heartbreak ever could. I had fought so hard to win him. I had played my cards perfectly, manipulated every move, ensured that April was the one left in ruins. But in the end, I was the one standing among the wreckage. Michael didn't leave me for April. He left because he had nothing left to hold on to. Not her, not me, not even himself. I wasn't his salvation. I was just a detour on his road to self-destruction. And that realization? It was worse than losing him. For a while, I told myself I didn't care. That I had always been the one in control, that love had never really mattered to me. But love is a funny thing. It sneaks up on you, even when you think you're immune to it. Even when you think you're the one doing the breaking. I had spent so much time trying to take what wasn't mine that I never stopped to ask if it was something worth having. And April? She didn't come back for him. She didn't gloat, didn't take pleasure in my downfall. She simply moved on. She rebuilt herself, found strength in the very thing that had tried to destroy her. She became untouchable. And that, more than anything, made me realize the difference between us. She had lost a husband. But I had lost myself. Do I deserve this? Maybe you think I got exactly what was coming to me. Maybe you're right. Maybe I was always meant to be the villain in this story. But let me ask you something. Have you ever wanted something so badly that you convinced yourself it was worth any price? Have you ever crossed a line, believing the reward would justify the cost, only to find out too late that you were wrong? That's what this was. A lesson I never wanted to learn. What do you think? Do you think I deserve this ending? Do you believe people like me ever truly change? Tell me your thoughts. Hate me, pity me, or maybe, just maybe, understand me. And if you want to know what happened next, don't forget to subscribe. Because trust me, my story isn't over yet. If you've ever been on either side of a story like this, share your experience. Let's talk. Let's unravel what it means to love, to betray, and to lose. And if you found this story worth discussing, share it. Because sometimes, the most important lessons come from the mistakes we don't want to admit we've made.